Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Lawyer Interviews. I'm your host, Cynthia, and joining us today is Brittany Bachus. Brittany, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. Excited to be a part.
So, Brittany, I'll give you the opportunity to introduce yourself.
My name is Brittany Bachus. I am obviously a lawyer, and I work in the field of criminal law. I am a prosecutor in Georgia. I'm not going to say who I work for, but I have worked on both the criminal defense side as well as the prosecutorial side.
And could you explain to us the difference between being a prosecutor and a criminal defense attorney?
Sure. So I I like to think of both prosecutors and criminal defense attorneys as superheroes, right? They both have very different strengths, though. So a prosecutor is somebody who's going to represent the people through the government. Right? They are the local government, they're the state, they're the federal government. And so the prosecutor, they're going to work at one of those levels. And when crimes are committed within their jurisdiction, they are going to make the decision to formally charge a person with a crime or multiple crimes. They're going to gather evidence. They're going to talk to witnesses, right? And they're either going to make a plea deal in the best interest of justice, or they're going to take that case to trial. And if they're taking it to trial, they likely want that guilty verdict, right? Defense attorneys, on the other hand, they represent the individual that is being accused of a crime. So think of Johnny Cochran and OJ, right? Essentially, whether it's a public defender or a private attorney, they represent their client's best interests by looking at all the evidence, doing the same thing, right? Talking to witnesses, talking to alleged victims, and either they're going to make that deal, they're going to take it to trial. They're going to want the not guilty verdict, right? So that their client can be positioned best. So that's really the basic bare bones difference between a defense attorney and a prosecutor.
And when you were in law school, did you know what side you wanted to be on?
So yeah, interestingly, I when I was an undergrad, I randomly took a job with a criminal defense attorney, not thinking that that was what I wanted to do. I quickly began to love it, and so as I also cared about issues within my community, the Black community, I cared about the racial disparities in sentencing, the racial disparities in criminal prosecution, and so I was like, this is it. This is what I'm going to do. And so I went to law school thinking that that was exactly what I was going to do. And I somehow ended up at the U.S. Attorney's office in an internship doing federal prosecution. And then I was at the Bronx DA's office doing an internship in state prosecution. And so I'm like, how did I think that I was coming to be a defense attorney? Well, what it ended up being was that I felt that I could do so much more as a prosecutor because there are not a lot of people of color in positions as such. And so I wanted to make sure that there was representation on that side. And if there was somebody who was getting railroaded by the system, I was a voice there. I was at the table to say, this isn't right. The evidence isn't adding up. We don't need to prosecute this case, right? And for the victims or of crimes, the people in the community, right? I wanted to be able to say, if something happens to them, how do I defend them, right? How do I defend victims? And the best way to work with all people, I think, is to be a prosecutor because you have power for the defendant and you have power for the community.
And so, what would you say is the hardest part about your job?
I would say that prosecuting crimes, sometimes I am required to prosecute cases that I don't necessarily want to prosecute. I still have supervisors, right? They have more experience, they have more expertise, they have their own life experiences and visions that really speak to why they may go a different way or why their process might be different than mine. And so sometimes I make an argument, they deny my argument and say, no, we're still moving forward in this way. And that's, it's a heavy decision to be a part of deciding someone's fate, whether or not someone's going to go to jail, whether or not someone's going to have that on their record, right? That's a heavy responsibility. And so I think that that's probably one of the hardest parts is that I don't have full autonomy.
Mm. And what would you say is the best part?
One of the best parts, I would say, a couple things. I would really say the same thing, right? As I talked about, it's really hard deciding whether or not someone is going to go to jail. So I actually got my Master's of Divinity as well. That is a theological degree studying religion and Christianity and all of that. And one of my professors said that that imprisoning human beings, right, is one of the greatest violations of God's time for man on earth, right? That's like a deep and heavy comment, right? But what it essentially said to me is that, gosh, to be the person who decides, right? Not someone is going to prison. Like, that is also one of the best parts, because listen, if there is somebody that is out there, serial murdering, raping children, right? They don't need to be on the street, right? They need some type of programming. They need to be off the street and to keep the community safe. So I get to weigh in on that, right? But also for the person who's not, or who didn't really commit a crime, but they're being railroaded, I get to help make the decision that they're not going to jail. So that's, I would say that that's one of the best things as well, even though I said it's one of the hardest things. And so, yeah, I think also being in prosecution or defense, I guess you could say either one, but it really gives you a way to get, you're getting thrown into the wolves when you work for the government, right? Whether you're a public defender, whether you're a prosecutor, right? The volume of cases is heavy. And so you are eventually and pretty soon going to be an expert, right, on all things criminal law by working in the system. And so you'll have the opportunity to speak on different platforms. You'll have the opportunity to speak to legislative committees and, help reform laws and work to, eradicate injustice within the criminal justice system. So it's really, I think it's really a skill building and a character building field. And it's tied to the community. So it's a good thing.
And we're lucky to be part of a system that has a presumption of innocence. And I
Yes.
always said that.
Yes, absolutely. You think about one of the more recent cases, you think about the Central Park Five, right? The five young men in New York who were wrongfully convicted of this murder, and they spent these years in jail only to be exonerated later. You think about all of these organizations, the Innocence Project, the Equal Justice Initiative that's ran by Brian Stevenson. You think about all these people, these organizations are in place because there's supposed to be a presumption of innocence. However, sometimes the system doesn't always allow people to have the presumption of innocence. And so that's why you have to fight for people who, may not be guilty of a crime.
That's true. And I'm sure you have heard this question before, but what is your response to people when they ask you, how could you defend an individual who you know is guilty? So that applies for more, criminal defense work.
Right. And like I said, I've worked for a criminal defense attorney as well. I think the answer that most attorneys would probably give is that the way our legal system is set up, even a person that's guilty of a crime is really entitled to and deserves a good defense. And so it's true, right? Also, we in society, we tend to look at things from a very black and white perspective instead of realizing that everyone that gets arrested for a crime isn't guilty, right? People forget about, like I said, the Innocence Project and things of that nature, right? And so you have to remember that they're not guilty until they're proven guilty. They're innocent until proven guilty. And so, and I think also most defense attorneys would just say, my client's innocent. They didn't do it. Right? they didn't do it. They didn't do it. That's what the average defense attorney would say. But yes, I think the general answer is that people are entitled to a defense no matter what they've done, the way our legal system is set up.
And what would you say are the top skills that a criminal attorney must have?
I would say, first of all, when you're talking about like the administrative skills of it all, especially if you work for like a prosecution or a public defender's office, a public interest group, I would say really, because you're dealing with severe volume, you really need to have organization skills. You really need to have attention to detail. You really need to be able to move swiftly and do things with, a level of speed so that you can move through. One of my courtrooms right now has, 1,300 cases that are backlogged that we're trying to deal with. You have to be able to move through those cases very quickly. I would say that because you're going to have to try cases, you're going to have to do motions before the court often. You want to make sure that you've got the personality for that. Some people just naturally can talk to people. Some people can talk to a jury and make they have a likable personality or a likability factor about themselves. And everybody's like, huh, I want to hear what they have to say because I like them. And that's just the average mind. The average mind of a person sitting on a jury is also thinking about the likability of the attorney. Just being honest about it. So I think that really being able to public speak and to be able to speak well and articulate. And I think intuition is the last thing I'll say, because if somebody throws 5 pieces of evidence on a desk, but you don't have an exact timeline, you've got to be able to create a narrative and a story with that evidence and say, hey, this is what happened. And you've got to be a creative for that, right? So intuition, creativity, thinking fast on your feet, those are some of the things that I would say.
So there's a common conversation in the legal community about criminal law not being a high paying area of practice. So most criminal attorneys, in my experience, don't do it for the money. So why did you decide to become a criminal attorney?
So again, I decided to become a criminal attorney because, I did not grow up with a lot, and living in underserved communities, you oftentimes, again, seeing people of color, people of poverty, railroaded by the system. They don't have a fair chance, right? They don't have the money to pay $50,000 for a defense, right? That an affluent person would have, or an upper middle class person might have. So people get railroaded all the time. And so because I saw that, I really wanted to have an impact in that system. And I would say that I don't know. I mean, most of my friends who practice on the civil side, they make a lot of money, right? But the ones who practice criminal and who are established, they do well for themselves. They don't do as well. They're not closing, personal injury cases left and right, or closing major real estate or commercial real estate deals, but they do well for themselves. And I would say that the general conversation in the industry, or what I heard when I first did my internship at a courthouse, was civil is where the money is, criminal is where the fun is. So if I would have anything to say to like an aspiring lawyer or a law student or someone who's looking to change practice areas, money is important. It's very important, but also you can't do something solely for the money, because I tried that. I tried a couple firms that I was really going after the money, the area of practice, because of the money. And I was looking at my watch every 5 minutes, hoping that the day would end. And I was miserable and I couldn't sleep because thoughts of cases are running through my mind. And I'm like, but I don't want to do this. And so it is so important to choose something that you're actually passionate about. When you're in law school, pay attention to the classes that really spark an interest in you. And you're like, man, I could do this for free. This is fun. And then you'll figure out ways to monetize it and make more money, but don't just go after the money. That's golden handcuffs. We don't want that. So
And I'm assuming you had a natural inclination to your criminal law class.
I did. I absolutely did. It was one of my it was one of the funner classes. It was just jarring, and like you would read some of the cases and you're like, I can't believe this person did this, right? I can't believe this happened, or these same terms are in torts, right? But they mean something completely different. Like, so it was just a very interesting. My teacher, of course, made it interesting, but criminal law altogether, like how can you look at a criminal law case and not be interested? And I remember my first time I was working in the Brooklyn courthouse interning for a judge, and she gave me this like 1,000-page document that I had to review and read. And I said, this is pretty cool, because I'm reading about the activity that happened in the projects, the Marcy projects in Brooklyn. And then I was like, ding, ding, ding. That's where Jay-Z grew up, like, and now everything is more interesting. So I think criminal law just has some components to it that other areas of law just may not have.
And at what point would you say that criminal attorneys, they become desensitized to maybe the situation?
That's a good question. I don't know. I think some people are desensitized before they even step into the field. Think about all the true crime shows we watch, First 48 and Snapped, and you see all these different movies and shows, and you're not surprised by anything, and you go into it thinking, oh, I want to be a diehard prosecutor because there's so much going on and I want to fight these crimes. But there are people that I know have been that I know that have been practicing law for 20 years and they're still not desensitized. I really think it has to do with the character of a person. And you know, that's probably what it has to do with, because I've seen a lot, but I will always care about people.
So would you say that someone's character, being that sensitive person, should that affect someone's choice in getting into criminal law?
Well, I think the better way to approach that is not specifically to look at your own character. You can do a self assessment, but you're not going to know anything until you take that internship in law school. So if you're in criminal law class and it's super interesting to you, you know, reach out to a public defender's office, reach out to a private attorney, reach out to the prosecutor's office, and do that summer or that one semester internship or externship, and you'll find out whether or not it's for you. And you know, over time, there are people who are very sensitive that I know, and they went to do that internship and said, "Oh, I will never ever do criminal life." Like that was all I needed to see was that one summer, and I realized I'm not cut out for it. So that's the best way to figure out if you're the person who's going to be good for that field, is just to go get the internship.
That's why they say you never know until you try it.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
And on top of the skills that you mentioned earlier, as a criminal lawyer, in my opinion, I think people will agree with me, it is very important to understand human psychology. And it's always fascinating, for me at least, to understand the motives of people who commit crimes. That said, you know, we've heard stories like, you know, the guy who shot and wounded Lady Gaga's dog walker, and they stole the French bulldogs. So these types of stories. And my question is, what do you believe might motivate an individual to shoot a human just to steal something of value?
So yeah, so I mean, so I obviously I did hear about that case. You know, for anybody who hasn't heard of it, it basically was a criminal who decided, or a defendant who decided to take a gun, shoot the dog walker, stole the French bulldogs, and wounded the person, right? And then Lady Gaga offered this $500,000 ransom for her dogs. You know, those are her fur babies. And, you know, one might actually look at that case and say, this seems really stupid, or why would you do that? But I honestly don't think that the answer is specific to this case. What's more important is the state of mind of the individual that's committing the crime. So all sorts of factors play into why people commit crime. So you've got mental health issues. Sometimes you feel like people feel as though, so let's say you grew up in poverty, right? You've tried everything you can. You have to feed your family. You may say, I'm going to rob this store because I need money to take care of my family. So if there are no legal means of obtaining what you want, you might then resort to illicit means of obtaining what you need to survive. I think that people are willing to, so think about very brilliant people. I like to use the example of like Suits, the TV show, right? You've got Harvey Specter, Jessica Pearson, right? They're super smart, right? Top of their classes from Harvard. Then you've got Mike Ross, who super smart, could literally pick up any law book and remember anything that he had ever seen. He was super intuitive, super on it, super hardworking. But we saw that prior to that, he was selling weed, and then he, you know, started helping people cheat on the LSAT, right? So he took his smarts and did something a little bit darker with it, right? So I think that sometimes people are brilliant, but it's whether they choose light or they choose darkness, right? It is literally a personal choice. So I would say, in short, there's a lot of reasons, particularly with the Lady Gaga situation. I'm not sure, but I kind of feel like he knew that those were her dogs, and like he wanted money. You know, he wanted the ransom. So, you know, but it's for so many different reasons why people commit crimes.
And this is why we have the mitigating and the aggravating factors to sentencing.
Yes, absolutely. There are things that will either increase time or decrease time. So, for instance, when you're dealing with like something that would originally be a man kills his wife, he catches her in the heat of the moment having sex with another man, he then kills her. What would normally be charged as murder may be mitigated by the fact that this is his spouse and he caught her in the act of adultery, right? And so, because now it may be mitigating, now it might be you know, murder in the second, not intentional murder, or it may be manslaughter, right? So we have these things in place because human nature, human capacity, mental capacity, all those things come into play when you're talking about why people do what they do.
Thank you.
You're
And
welcome.
in addition, you are a very fashionable woman and you enjoy posting on your socials. And you're in the criminal law field. So have you ever received backlash in your line of work with the content that you're choosing to post?
Honestly, I've never even thought about it in terms of law. So I am also a minister, right? And I have struggled with like the church and the traditional perception of like what they expect a minister or a clergy person to be, right? And feeling the weight, oh, I need to conform. But really, I don't let that affect me anymore. Social media has kind of changed the game. So you look back a generation or two, you see our parents who are doctors and lawyers and architects and judges and whatever, and they're this very straight arrow, always in a suit, black, blue, gray. You don't deviate, and that's what you saw. Social media now has opened up a world where you see you see a mix of everything. I see so many attorneys that I follow. Some have 300,000 followers, some have 1 million followers, right? And it's like what keeps people interested is the fact that we are multifaceted. It is okay in the day, I can practice law. At night, I can be a glamazon that's, cute and I'm out drinking champagne and living the night away. And then Saturday, I can be fighting for civil rights, and Sunday I'm at church, right? I think we are meant to be multifaceted. And so I would never let anyone speak to who I am. I'm very confident in who I am. And above all, I remain classy at all times. So basically,
I love it.
period. Period.
I love it. And it ties back to, I was speaking in one of my earlier videos about that work-life balance. Is like, why not have a balanced life and really do it all?
Absolutely. People, law by its nature, and I don't say this to deter anyone, but law by nature, no matter what field you're in, is likely stressful. Okay. Law creates stress. And so you have to have that work-life balance. You have to be able to enjoy the music that you want to, have a drink when you want to, hang out with friends, take a vacation when you want to, wear that bathing suit and don't let anyone criticize you for it. Because yes, whether it seems crazy or not, attorneys wear bathing suits too. So, you definitely have to have a balanced life. And I wouldn't let anyone at this point in my life take that away from me. So,
Oh, of course. I feel people have this misconception that we're serious all the time.
oh yeah, no, some of the lawyers are great and principled when they need to be, but we are people. We want to have fun too. So
Hence where the saying goes of, work hard, play hard. I think that applies to us a lot.
I think so, absolutely. And some people, unfortunately, have not figured out that balance, and all they do is work. But I strongly believe in balance, so you won't catch me on the clock 24 hours a day.
Well, that concludes the end of our interview. I want to thank you for your great insights. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm pretty sure my audience will really benefit from everything we've discussed today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I enjoyed you.
Thank you. And for the audience, please don't hesitate to leave your comments below and subscribe to our YouTube channel. See you next time.